webinar. Everything today is going to be made possible by our partners at Rome, our virtual workspace. And most importantly, the experts today are from Protopia as well as other companies. Just to give a little bit of a preference on why we're here today, and we appreciate you guys so much. I think it's very obvious that AI is reshaping financial services from fraud detection to personalized insights. However, innovation is often slowing down when sensitive data is involved. So today's talk is really going to be focused on the privacy and governance requirements that allow teams to have costly isolation first designs and limit scale. We'll be hearing from multiple leaders today from the Bank of New York, Sanctify AI, and Protopia AI, and they will show us how banks and AI builders can safely run sensitive workflows across shared or serverless environments, ultimately eliminating plaintext exposure while boosting GPU utilization and reducing spend by 3 to 10x. So, without further ado, I'm going to let the professionals come and share a little bit about themselves. So, I'm inviting Brittany to the stage. Please come out and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AJ, and welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Brittany. I am part of the team here at Protopia AI, and we're very excited to be working with our friends and partners over at AI Collective and have a really good session teed up today. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Do feel free to use the meeting chat, introduce yourself, ask questions, feel free to respond. As the session goes on, we're going to have a brief panel discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about some technology solutions that we offer here at Protopia AI, and provide some different perspectives from both the enterprise side and the application builder side, looking at how do we bring AI to the financial services industry in a safe and secure way. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Have them come on stage and introduce themselves. First, we have Iman Ibrahimi from Protopia AI, Jeremiah Sadow from Bank of New York, and Brad Lawler, who is on his way over, from Sanctifai. While Brad joins us on stage, why don't we give each of our panelists just a couple minutes to introduce themselves. Iman, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Brittany. Hey, everyone. I'm Iman Ibrahimi, CEO and founder at Protopia. Background-wise, I spent about 10 years at NVIDIA prior to starting Protopia. And we're focused on enabling cost-efficient and private inference for essentially verticals that have any sort of sensitive data. And what we're here to discuss today with our partners is financial services, which is one of the most important of those verticals. And I'll turn it back to you, Brie.
Thanks, Iman. Jeremiah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Jeremiah Sadow, most recently and formerly of the Bank of New York, BNY. I was the Chief Compliance Officer for AI and Strategic Partnerships and Investments, which forms basically the bank's innovation agenda.
Okay, and finally we have Brad Lawler.
Hello. My career has been focused on helping individuals and families make better financial decisions. I've done this as a startup, helping families directly or working with financial institutions as a third party. That application was acquired by a large financial institution. So then I kind of transitioned my mission over to doing it within a large financial institution. And now I'm back doing it for a startup.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. We're looking forward to a good discussion today. And Brad, let's just start with you. I think we all know the folks that joined here today are all excited about the possibilities for AI and financial services. We all know that there's a lot of opportunity out there. As somebody who is building AI that directly targets this industry, can you talk a little bit about what those opportunities are from your point of view, and then maybe a few of the barriers to entry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm back on the startup side of things because I think now is a really exciting time. We have incredible access to powerful inference and intelligence technologies at a cost that allows startups like ours to address problems and leverage business models that we wouldn't really have considered before. We can now focus on what have been considered niche problems or small market opportunities. And doing this with financial institutions, obviously for financial institutions or healthcare or law, the barriers to entry has always been the sensitivity of the data. But as a startup and operating as a third party, we now have a chance to for these large financial institutions to work with us and not. I think until recently, these financial institutions have tried to solve the problems themselves internally because they don't want their sensitive financial information of their clients to leave their environment and go to a third party. And we don't, as a startup and as a third party, we don't want um, to run our solution in their environment. It comes with a host of problems, no pun intended. We want to be able to do it as a third party to create the best solution, and I think we can do that now.
Thank you. Jeremiah, speaking as somebody who's kind of been on the buy side of that equation, can you talk a little bit about, how that looks from your perspective, and what the risks you see that are out there, and maybe how we're beginning to overcome them?
Sure. And if you want to, there's a slide that kind of shows a couple of the thematic areas. If you want to just flash that while I kind of talk about it. So when a line of business comes to a cross-functional discipline committee and says we have this use case, you really have to think about what is the use case, who are the users, their entitlements, what type of data are the users going to use, the classification of that. Again, is it internal operations? Is it internal employees? Is it client data? Is it something that is going to go to the client? So all these things, you really need to listen. What is the intent of the use case? And here we have a couple of those that really just kind of talks about, again, these higher risk sensitive data classifications that we would think about. And so from there, then a use case will start. And as Brad mentioned, where the data actually resides is one of the critical areas for how a use case can get approved for a pilot.
And as somebody who's done this before, any other color that you want to share for the AI app builders in the audience who are maybe looking to sell into somewhere like a Bank of New York? What does this process look like? What is the sort of pilot to production pipeline? Do things change throughout that?
The path to production does change. So again, it goes back to what is the solution you're trying to solve for, and what is the application that you as a third party is trying to deliver to the enterprise. Is it a feature? Is it a service? Is it a model itself? Even when a intended buyer wants to do something, there are going to be a lot of stakeholders from the first line CIOs, legal, compliance, third-party governance that are really going to think about, can we do this ourselves? Is this some type of feature that we already have somewhere else in the enterprise?
Iman, over to you. When we think about the financial services space, it's just one of many industries with this kind of sensitive data problem when it comes to AI inference. Can you talk a little bit about some of the technical realities on that side? Sort of what is stopping AI inference from becoming something that's easy to scale in the enterprise without all of these privacy considerations that we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, I think when you're asking about the problem of scale, often it becomes a matter of where is the compute capability, right? That's underpinning the inference. Where is that being delivered? And we heard right now Brad and Jeremiah talk about kind of two aspects, right? One being the sensitivities that Jeremiah identifies as a chief compliance officer of, like, these are the things that will determine where the data can go. And then Brad talking about where the application provider wants to, and it makes sense for them economically from a cost perspective, where to deliver the inferencing and the model. I think we have a slide on kind of just depicting what that looks like and where the problem arises from. So if we just think about, for example, the data owner within an organization, right, on the left-hand side of this slide, and the various data sources that they may have, where sensitive information can be defined in a lot of different ways. Jeremiah had a host of them on the slide that he was talking to. But in addition to even things like financial reports or personally identifiable information, things like code, right, are things that now are being used with AI for developer productivity across all sorts of organizations, but in financial services also, because there's a lot of people developing code there. And that data needs to be used with some AI application in many cases. Now, Brad is building one such AI application, right? The AI application will have a front end that sits on the left-hand side, which is the client, and the data will be captured from within the data owner's root of trust, where typically it's sitting on storage somewhere in encrypted mode at rest. And when it wants to be communicated to where that inferencing is happening on the right-hand side, it's going to be encrypted in transit as well. So those two stages at rest on the left-hand side, within the client application, within the root of trust, and in transit, it's typically protected well. But with these AI endpoints where applications are built around an inferencing functionality that for cost purposes ends up being delivered in some sort of managed environment where literally the servers on the right-hand side will be operated by some other entity, neither the AI application provider nor the enterprise. It might be a hyperscaler, it might be a neocloud, but the data that reaches those servers will then be decrypted into its raw form, right? Where the data is plain text readable, any sort of access to the systems on the right-hand side will see that plain text information, whether it be in memory of the GPUs that are running the models, or whether it be often persisting on disks on the right-hand side, where things like long contexts that go into reasoning models may spill from GPU memory to CPU memory and then to disk, or whether logging is occurring. Logging has been a big topic in the foundation model world as of late. When logging needs to happen, that logging for speed purposes is often just done in plain text. And so things that happen on the right-hand side to the data resulting in plain text exposure are why the data owner on the left-hand side, like Jeremiah was describing, what we've seen in various industries, why the data owner will just prevent some of these use cases from actually even coming to light. And that prevention is where the kind of whole relevance of AI to these industries starts slowing down and basically not delivering value. So this is really the privacy gap that ends up slowing down return on investment in a lot of use cases in many industries, but specifically when it comes to the financial services space as well. And yet the actual sensitive data needs to be used, right? So the return part of return on investment is tied to succeeding at using the sensitive information, not just saying that it's sensitive and hence we shouldn't use it.
And Iman, just to add one slight point to that, that's actually the value is the delivery of it. That's way after the approval to begin.
That's
and so
right.
yes, you actually can use this data.
That's right. I guess a quick question for you there is, given the fact that the value doesn't show up until after approval, right? Does that become a part of your conversation of, okay, if you are trying to deliver said value, then you need to be able to show in the approval process that the value and the cost associated with bringing that value actually makes sense, right? Because if the proposal from the business unit is that, well, I'm going to have to spend X amount where X far outweighs the Y benefit that it's going to bring, then does that actually get past compliance in that way?
So nuanced answer to your good question. That ROI discussion really happens in the line of business where the use case happens. Call it transaction banking, private wealth, HR. These are use cases that are delivered to an end user, right? And so those second line teams, the risk and compliance teams, they're going to understand what is the sensitivity level, the classification level of their line of business data. They'll come to someone like myself and talk about, the general use case, and they will understand the risks, and I will help advise them on, again, the tools in the stack, the things that are in the architecture procedures and the principles that says, okay, here's how we will protect, that data for your higher value, higher risk use case.
Got it.
Brad, do you want to talk a little bit about how this resonates with you as somebody who's kind of building for this industry, both what Jeremiah touched on and I think also some of the technical risks and the inference time risks and realities that Iman showed on that slide? Would love to get your reaction to that, and then maybe also just some color around the other considerations that your customers have in mind, speaking to other folks that are building for this industry. What do they need to know about how this industry operates, and what those customers are thinking of? What do you know that you can kind of impart to them during today's session?
Actually, it looks like there's a question right now on the chat that addresses exactly that. So it seems like we got to it right.
Love it. Good timing.
Do you want to read that question, or is it?
Yeah, the question just says, what are some architectural changes to eliminate plain text exposure when building an isolated environment for early stage applications and then migrating it to shared or serverless environment?
Okay, well, Brittany, yeah, Jeremiah, I'll let you take that. But Brittany, from my perspective, when Iman first showed me SGT, it was like an incredible new way of thinking about things. But it wasn't until someone like Jeremiah said, yeah, this will pass the sniff test at a large financial institution, where I realized there's a real opportunity here for financial institutions to start working with third parties and startups and really take advantage of the value that we're able to offer, because we can now finally leverage the data that we need for the most valuable use cases. I mean, which we've never had before, and do it much quicker. I mean, it takes about 5 minutes for the financial institutions and the decision makers to see the value of what we're offering. It takes about 2 years for them to realize that we're able to handle the data in a secure way and deliver the solution. So if we're able to quickly pass the sniff test when it comes to their sensitive data leaving their environment and coming to us, it really opens up a whole new opportunity for those of us that are creating solutions that want to get into to financial services, legal, and healthcare type organizations.
Jeremiah, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I won't comment on the architecture. I'll leave that to Iman. But I completely agree. A place like BNY or JP Morgan or any peer institution has enormous resources. Not every institution does. Not every institution has already a chief compliance officer, chief risk officer for AI. And so a solution like this definitely helps bring the time consideration, the cost consideration of using said data. And again, the resources talk about not just the human capital, but the infrastructure required. And so the ability to use and reuse cloud providers, third-party providers, external providers, and use your data safely, again, does allow experimentation. And then where those experiments are, successful, with higher risk data, you're able to bring that forward. And in the race today for AI, race for talent, race for solutions, race for clients, race for products, that's an incredible advantage to an organization that might not be able to compete, with a $1 trillion budget.
Yeah. Well, let's try to make it a little bit more real, and we can.
Why don't we put up the solution that we've been kind of outlining with Brad in kind of that application format. So this is a sketch that we put together based on our understanding of kind of this financial advisor application that is one of the types of applications that we understood Brad's team is building, where they're serving essentially an application to enterprise customers where the enterprise customer will have sensitive data that they want to use, they need to use, right? So, for example, here, imagine asking a question about some situation about the family's wealth based on some trust documents and just balance sheets, etc., that are going to be sent to some model for inferencing, right, to answer that question from those documents. The way that we are enabling the use of compute on the right hand side that normally teams like Brad's may want to turn into dedicated environments only in order to answer privacy questions from the left hand side. The way we are solving for that is saying, what if the data did not need to show up in plain text on the right hand side? And that's where Protopia's product gets introduced. So you'll see that purple layer called Stained Glass Transform. Stained Glass Transform is a product that is based on some core technology that we've been building here at Protopia for 4 years, and prior to that, it comes from university research. And I collaborated on the kind of inference side of the story with those teams at University of California, San Diego. But what it does, Stained Glass, is that it takes plain text information in the form of these input prompts and context and transforms it in a one-way and stochastic manner to these transformed embeddings that are understandable by unmodified target models on the right-hand side. And that's where how we do that is the special sauce here. But the intent is for the data to no longer be retrievable back to plain text. So if you were to do something like trying to turn those embeddings back to plain text, unlike what happens with deterministic embeddings, where you can actually retrieve the text, here you'd end up with essentially this gibberish-looking information in the middle, but those underlying embeddings will still be understandable by the model. The model will be able to respond in an encrypted form, where now the application environment surfaces the response back to the enterprise customer. Now, what's happening here is on the right-hand side, we've enabled the serving of the most popular models like Llama, Mistral, Qwen on pretty much any managed inference platform, whether it be AWS Bedrock, whether it be with Modal on your favorite cloud, or through Base 10 on a variety of neoclouds. Basically, we've created the ability to serve a model on a platform that makes sense for the use case's budget, and be able to have a strong data privacy story around what data gets sent to the actual model and exits the application environment, which lives in the data owner's root of trust. So I'll pause there, but I'm curious, Brad, if you have any kind of thoughts on how having access to something like this changes the normal way that you would think about kind of first early stage application and then migrating it. Architecturally, does it help reduce some of your steps or think about them more cost efficiently?
Well, so cost efficiently, I think number one, but I'll add some context first. This application that you're talking about, we call Provost, and until now, wealthy families have worked with a collection of professionals or a firm and spent sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for them to understand really well estate planning documents like trusts and wills combined with financial information from statements or balance sheets, and to be that kind of go-to source of information that understands everything for these families and is even able to take that information and create personalized learning paths for different people in the family to make sure that values and legacy are passed down along with spending behavior and making sure that that wealth makes it from generation to generation. And we are using AI to replace that, to replace those very expensive services. And to do that, we have to be able to use the new LLM technologies that are out there. But everything, but our ability to be this AI consigliere for the family and spit off these valuable personalized learning paths has to include information from these most sensitive of documents, the revocable trust combined with their balance sheets, their financial information. So for us to be able to answer these questions and provide those benefits, we have to be able to extract bits of information from these documents and use it in our analysis and our models. And when it comes to cost, that means to deliver the cost to these families could end up becoming 2 or 3 times as much if they want the most secure solution and run it in a dedicated environment for that individual family. 2 or 3 times the cost of the application just for security. So I think that what you're talking about here, Iman, is giving us the ability to leverage shared environment and amortize and spread that cost for hosting across all the families, so that we're able to keep the cost low, so that it's not just the wealthiest of families that can take advantage of this product, but we can have a much wider addressable market of families, and anybody can take advantage of the capabilities that we're building.
I think one of the things that we've actually been seeing on that front with some of our other partners, Brad, is also that sometimes application providers or startups will try to minimize the impact of said costs that you're talking about in dedicated environments. They'll try to isolate the customer from that cost by way of just accepting that as part of their cost of serving, which just ends up ruining the margins of the business. And isn't very sustainable. So people may start that way and essentially try to spin up dedicated environments to serve their customers to begin with, but very quickly they'll come to a point where when they're scaling beyond the first, call it 5 to 10 million worth of revenue, then being able to break out further involves coming up with a pattern that improves their margins, and that's where this is also pretty significant in terms of its impact on scale of delivery as well.
Yeah, you don't have to make that compromise anymore. You're right.
Iman, before we move on to a demo, because I think it'd be really helpful for the audience to see how this actually looks in practice, can you answer Mona's question here in the chat about where SGT fits in the stack?
Yeah, so you can think of stained glass transform as a very small neural network compared to the target model that you're trying to reach, that runs within a container. Think of that as a Kubernetes container, a Docker container, within the inference pipeline. And wherever you have a small amount of compute available, and by that I mean, again, compared to the target model. So you can think of it as either a high-end CPU or a low-end GPU. You'll be able to run stained glass in the inference pipeline coming from your application environment before you hit the endpoint on the right-hand side. So think of it as a container-based solution that gets dropped in there. The input will look just like an OpenAI API compatible input, meaning the same way that you would have connected the prompt and context to an endpoint on the right-hand side, you would literally just be changing out the URL to now connect to the URL that is the stained glass transform proxy, we call it, which identifies where that container is running. And so to that extent, it becomes an API call on the left-hand side of the transform. On the right-hand side, the output will connect to the language model endpoint with anything that's VLLM 0.9.1 or after. It will accept prompt embeddings as the input. And I see a thumbs up there, so it sounds like we answered the question.
Yeah, it sounds like we answered the question. Thank you for the question. Just a note to the audience, if there are more questions, feel free to put them there. We're going to do a quick video demo of our solution, and then we will switch over to some audience Q&A. So if you have more questions, we would love to hear them.
There's a question about whether we vibe coded this, which is a fun question. No, we unfortunately vibe coding was not available when the biggest portion of this product was written. So this product started we started developing the product actually 2021. And the first few iterations of users were actually in the computer vision space, not in the language model space. The language model applications, obviously post ChatGPT, is where everyone got introduced to it. I do see another question about should explainability be prioritized over performance in regulated environments. I guess Jeremiah will have thoughts on that. I'll just add that explainability, as far as being able to explain the outcome of a particular inference, where it came from, this using stained glass does not imply that that correlation between a particular output and the input is broken in any way, right? While the transformation is stochastic, meaning if you run it many times, you will transform into randomized representations. You can reproduce the transformation with seed set in the random function. So it's always the case that you will be able to trace back a particular inference record from the transformed format back to the original data that created it. And that's where kind of explainability at the end of the day is between the raw input that is maintained in the root of trust and the output that generated it. So that lineage is not meant to change at all and should be maintained in that way. But Jeremiah, if you have any responses in addition.
I would just add, and it's almost a separate topic here, because again, so I think transparency and explainability really talk about the what is happening and then the how that is manifesting itself. There's a lot of good work being done by the Bank for International Settlements. There is probably changes in the regulations in the probably coming years in the international bodies, not necessarily the U.S. perhaps. And then the Stanford Center, so Stanford's HAI Center has put out some really good materials on transparency and explainability, and really articulating what is the difference between explainability.
I'll also jump on, since we're in question answering mode. I think it's worthwhile adding one more. There's a question again. I think Jeremiah, you'll have some notes on this too, but I'll express what we've heard from our partners on this. If a model provider like OpenAI has zero data retention endpoints, are financial services clients comfortable using that endpoint? If not, why? I'll just speak to zero data retention in general, not just OpenAI, but anyone. Zero data retention at this point is pretty much table stakes. It's not that you can really work with anyone that has sensitive data and not have zero data retention. But what we've seen is that that also doesn't mean that all tiers of data are going to be used by the entity that owns the data, just because they trust that the provider is not retaining the data. The fact is that the systems on which these models are running, at the end of the day, they are just compute systems. It's not that the person trying to use the platform does not believe that the platform operator is not using best cybersecurity practices or is even malicious. The fact is that those systems, because they are just compute systems, can end up with unauthorized users on them. And today, the data that flows through those systems, both in memory and sometimes frequently on disk, can end up being just plain text information. And the data owner, to that extent, will decide what tiers to use with a model that has that inherently baked in, independent of zero data retention being, I, OpenAI, am not purposefully retaining your data. Now, there are some systems that started off with just no memory on the right-hand side at all. So Grok's first versions, I believe, were of that nature. But as kind of systems have gone into reasoning models, etc., kind of operating those models with absolutely no state on the right-hand side is also pretty challenging. And so the fact that data can end up in plain text, both in memory and on disk in logs or core dumps, becomes implementation dependencies that the data owner depends on, which they don't want to decide based on. But I'll pause there, Jeremiah. You'll have seen this plenty as well.
I would just add, BNY and probably other financial institutions at our size and scale, we would have 40 versions of all 5 major model providers. And so depending on the use case and the legal terms associated with that as we use it, there may be some that we either have to risk accept the use of it, or we just wouldn't allow it. So it really depends on the use case.
Yeah, those tiers of data basically are different in the use cases, right?
Yeah. And thanks for the question, Cam. Okay, moving on. We did want to have just a couple minutes to show folks what this really looks like under the hood. So let me share this video, and Iman will sort of talk through.
Yeah, so this is just meant to be kind of really quickly taking that slide that we were showing from Brad's use case, and thinking about kind of, okay, well, what does it look like if this were running with Protopia, right? So imagine asking that same question about kind of taxes that requires also sensitive information to be attached to what the model's going to do, right? And normally, what would end up happening, I guess, is, I don't know if that demo is running right now.
I'm gonna play it.
So fun when even it does seem to.
Oh, I got 1 second.
Maybe you have bandwidth issues going on, but it's fun when even a recorded demo ends up causing issues.
Just give me 1 second.
While you're doing that, I believe the prompt we're using is something along the lines of, what are our estimated taxes? This is the product that we're building that's replacing these very expensive resources. Something that a family member would ask of those professionals they're working with is, what are my expected taxes at so and so's death? And you need a combination of their living trust combined with balance statement or financial information to be able to accurately answer that. And that's what we loaded sample versions of that trust and balance statement or balance sheet here.
Yeah, so that balance sheet would have all sorts of sensitive information like we're showing here, right? There'd be dollar values, information about individuals, properties, etc. And today, this information shows up in this form on the server that's running the model. This isn't about OpenAI at all, by the way, right? Like, this could be your own model running in Bedrock, right? It could be a custom model that you're running on a Neo cloud. This data will show up in plain text on that system. It's not about the model and who owns the model. It's about the fact that there's an operator that is serving you an endpoint to run your model, and that data can be turned into stochastic embeddings. So what we're showing here is that on the user side, first, those tokens would be transformed into deterministic embeddings, which does not provide any data protection because this is a one-to-one mapping and is reversible. But what we then do, based on stained glass transforms underlying technology, is we have learned for the target model, in this case llama, how to take these embeddings that are deterministic and take them through a transformation function where every time you run through that transformation function, the set of stochastic embeddings that are generated will look different, but they will all make sense to the target model that's going to consume them. What is important here is that, again, because of the stochastic nature here, this is not a one-to-one mapping anymore. That one-to-one mapping will change at runtime. You're going to a different stochastic embedding set every time. But then now what's happened is that trying to do some sort of mapping of, okay, what does this embedding look like if I look at it in the token space, it will result in basically gibberish looking text if a reconstruction is attempted based off of it. However, the goal is that, and this is kind of showing what that reconstruction might look like for these embeddings. The goal, however, is for the target model to still be able to operate based on the embeddings that it's sent to, and for the output to only be visible by the user that made the request. So we want to go from what has traditionally been talked about as end-to-end protection to this notion of round-trip protection through the inference process, where now the output also gets generated in encrypted form, and only the user that started the request will have the private key that will be able to see the output in its raw form. So that encrypted text is what will be seen kind of coming back into the user session. And then the rest of the model running will be able to, the user side will be able to use the corresponding key for the output to generate the plain text response that the user can understand. And so that's really just the process of what was happening on the slide being shown, in this case on a Llama model running in AWS. And there's a quick question here of what are the performance implications of using SGT. Performance in terms of accuracy, it becomes a benchmarking story outside of use cases like what we just showed. I think most customers and partners will be interested in trying out their own prompts. So in the case of Brad's use case here, right, he will have his own prompts, his own benchmark that he will run in plain text, and he'll run in transformed format and see whether those answers are similar enough and pass kind of the accuracy of the response test. But go ahead, Brad.
What about performance in terms of latency?
Yep, absolutely. We'll get to that in just one second, but I just wanted to finish off the accuracy part by saying, if you think about what stained glass is enabling, it's the ability to actually use those documents that are sensitive, right? Without those sensitive documents, questions like what we just showed wouldn't even mean anything to the model, because the model doesn't know anything about Robert or the family trust, right? But in a lot of enterprise use cases, it's actually the case that, again, if you're just asking a question without being able to have the associated documents where the answers are, you end up with pretty bad responses. The model will hallucinate, come up with an inaccurate response, and now you're able to actually use data alongside the question that will improve the quality of the responses. From a just pure accuracy of the model perspective, with and without stained glass, you can get to very close accuracy of the model itself operating. And as far as the question of performance in terms of latency goes, it's super important to point out that because of the way that the transformation function has been built to be a very small neural network, these transformations can run, like I had mentioned earlier, on pretty normal compute at very high speeds. So the transformation for something like a Llama 8B model that was running there will be just around 10 milliseconds or less, compared to seconds worth of generation time from the model. Generally, the transformation function will be a couple of orders of magnitude faster than the model that it is targeting. And beyond that 10, 20, maybe 15 milliseconds, depending on the size of the target model, additional time to first token that may happen, again, based on the target model size, that will still be in that couple of orders of magnitude faster. Beyond that, everything else ends up being hidden under the pipeline.
And if I can just add to that, there's another question. It is extremely rare. It's really not happening yet for a use case to be fully automatic. There still always is a human in the loop, especially for higher risk use cases. There's always going to be a human in the loop. So what is the action that needs to be taken? Is it something that's going to a client, or is it client enabled? Is it an operational process? There's the vast majority is that there's still a human in the loop.
There's a couple of questions here, Iman, might make sense to take them together. One is around the idea, Parna says, is the idea to also modify the embeddings stored in the vector database? And there's a question from Andrew about the data in the application environment. Is it required to be in CSV or a specific format, or completely unstructured?
Yeah, great questions. No, the data in the application side can be completely unstructured. In fact, the PDF that we were showing here happened to have a table in it, but it can be completely just free text. There's no requirement on the input having any sort of structure whatsoever. As I'd mentioned, many of our very first use cases have been in the computer vision domain, where the input is actually just streaming video, for example, or images of checks, for example, in the financial services space. As far as the idea to modify embeddings stored in vector database, how this kind of sits next to a vector database, you can think of it as the transformation can run on the output of what comes out of your vector database. So if you've got a vector database where you're doing some sort of semantic search and it comes up with your top K documents where the answer might be, today in baseline, those top K documents and the prompt would be sent in plain text. In this case, they would go through the transformation function before being sent. But it does not, what we're showing here is not meant to change what is stored in the vector database. It's dynamically applied to what is coming out of the vector database and being sent somewhere else. So you're not necessarily storing those outputs. Quick follow-up from Andrew is, would there be an ontology in the CV examples? I'm not sure I fully understand the ontology question, but no, in the CV examples, we're basically applying that neural network that I mentioned is stochastic, meaning instead of weights, it has probability distributions. We are applying that same sort of transformation only to pixels of an image. So every pixel or group of pixels rather will have a noise function that is completely perturbing or replacing the value of the pixel. In fact, in computer vision examples, it's not just perturbation. You have cutoffs where you'll find completely parts of the image completely get changed by way of pixels being replaced or being cut off. So and that's where actually the term stained glass comes from. We aren't showing it here, maybe in a future webinar, but computer vision use cases actually, that's what the transformed data looks like. It looks like you're looking at it through a pane of stained glass.
It's fascinating to see for everybody else on the call when you see the transform side by side.
Yeah, agreed. The computer vision examples are very cool. All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. Thank you for all the great questions. We've been answering them as we go. We can definitely take a few more, but I want to make sure that both Jeremiah and Brad get a chance to kind of circle back to some of the problems and opportunities that we talked about up top, and kind of understand how solutions like this open up doors, open up the ability to serve new kinds of applications in FSI. So Jeremiah, let's start with you. Let's remember back to the beginning of this session where you talked about those 4 different categories of sensitive data and kind of how you evaluate from your standpoint as an AI compliance officer what these high-risk categories are. How does something like this help you in that calculation or rethink what that matrix looks like?
Sure. Earlier, I mentioned the cross-functional team must really actively listen for the use case intent. It either starts with someone like me or ends with someone, like me. Once the solution is applied to the enterprise, the entire Gen AI risk profile, across subsequent use cases is really bought down. All right. So it might not take a high-risk use case to a low risk, but it's one less thing for legal, cyber, tech risk, compliance, the line of business teams to be concerned about, which surprisingly can help reduce a lot of the unnecessary noise and really just getting started, but then also getting it over the first one over the line. And once the first one is over the line, then that will allow, again, the cross-functional team, to be comfortable when they see, again, other high-risk use cases, other high-risk, more sensitive data being proposed for higher value use cases.
Yeah, and Brad, from your standpoint as somebody who is, building for those use cases and hoping to be that first one in the door, what's your take?
Sorry, take on which part of it?
Well, in part on what Jeremiah said, but I think how architectural choices are impacted, but even just from a business standpoint, how do technologies like the one that we just talked through kind of impact what you're able to build, how you're able to sell into these markets and kind of express the value of the security side of your application or the product that you're delivering into the FSI industry?
Yeah, I mean, it changes the conversation, and it makes it easier to and Protopia is making it easier. They're helping to tell the story about that piece. I mean, our new data privacy and security slide should just be Protopia and it being able to explain Protopia, and not having to. And it's going to be different for us because we will have to have we're going directly to wealthy families through family offices and through advisors that work sometimes at a large financial institution, and the talking points will be about Protopia will be very simple for the family and helping them to understand it in a way that the way that they're interested in to earn their trust, and then to earn the trust of the financial institutions. We know very well from Jeremiah what the traditional um, way of earning trust is. It traditionally has been identity and permissions, data residency, things like that, and now there are new sets of bullet points added to the audit to make sure that the provider should never have access to readable data at inference time, that that we capture exportable logs and retention controls. There's all these things. We know what it looks like, and Protopia is doing a great job of, when we point to our solution being Protopia, they've done a very good job of helping us with those audits to make sure that the institutions understand that this is checking all the boxes.
Iman, we have another question in the chat around availability of stained glass as an MPC to integrate into Langflow.
So quick. First of all, thank you for Brad for those kind of words. We've been learning from you what kind of the customer may want to see and how we can help application builders like yours improve cost structures. So thank you for kind of sharing the use cases with us along the way. In response to Mona's question, there is an active piece of work on integrating with Langflow going on right now, with the actual from the creators of Langflow. But we'll have to follow up online for us to put you in touch with them or understand how exactly you would like to use it. It's not publicly available yet, but there is some work going on there with Langflow.
And then we have time for just one final question, which is also an integration question. How easily can stained glass be integrated into enterprise legacy systems?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Brad, you probably have a lot of insight into legacy systems.
I think the question is, should you still be using the legacy systems? I don't know. We're in
when we're talking about integration, right? At the end of the day, it becomes just like a question of, is there a data path from wherever, if it's a legacy system holding that data, is there a data path to within that root of trust on the left-hand side of these slides that we've been demonstrating, within the enterprise's root of trust, or where they're comfortable with the data appearing? Can you get that data to a system with minimal compute to run a container, right? And if so, then the answer is yes, you can integrate it in that way. If you're talking about more style of like the data storage, it really depends on, I guess, what the enterprise legacy system is, because these transformations can also happen within storage, on-prem storage systems, where the file coming off storage is transformed before it's sent there. So we have integrations with NetApp, for example, as one of the primary on-prem storage providers for enterprises everywhere, that enables running stained glass on the NetApp device before the data is shipped to an endpoint. So it kind of depends on what those legacy systems are. But if there's an opportunity to get in deeper, I'm sure we can explore what that is.
Yeah.
Brittany, you dropped that information there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can always find us at protopia.ai, or for folks that were here today that would like to have a follow-up with somebody on our team, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I will route you in the right direction and make sure that we can set up a next conversation. I just want to say thank you so much to Iman, Brad, and Jeremiah for coming and sharing today and talking with us about the industry, talking with us about AI, talking with us about security and governance for those applications. I think the audience really came away with a lot, so thank you all. Thank you to everybody who joined today. And thank you to AI Collective for helping us to produce and promote today's session. Thanks, you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.